Okay, welcome back to our discussion of climate change. Today we're going to be talking about civil society and corporate strategies to tackle climate change. So in our last presentation we talked about government strategies for attacking the issue of climate change. We talked about adaptation and mitigation and all the different ways that government policy can be tailored to address climate change. Today we're going to talk about the other aspects of society. What can people themselves and corporations and non-governmental organizations and so forth do to actually attack the problem as well? So this is going to be a fairly short presentation. First of all, let's just look again back at the need for action. We know that solutions to climate change, if they're going to be effective, can't just come from governments. We have to have buy-in from all parts of society. We need individual people to be on board. We need businesses on board. We need civil society organizations like non-governmental organizations to contribute as well. Just to review, why is it that there has been so little action relative to the problem thus far? And this would apply both to governments and to non-governmental entities as far as inaction. First of all, it's a very complex problem. We said they have a special term for that type of a problem called a wicked problem, where there's just a lot of finite details and interworkings of this problem that make it difficult to understand, difficult to predict exactly how it's going to go. It's been a long-term problem. It's not like it's just immediately emerged overnight like some things do that capture our attention, like a pandemic, for example. This is something sort of like the old analogy of putting a frog in a pot. If you put it directly into boiling water, it's going to immediately notice a problem, right? But if you put it in a cold pot of water and slowly heat it, it's not going to have the same kind of reaction. Also, financial priorities often come into conflict with this. A lot of people say it's difficult to have kind of a free market neoliberal economic system and the kind of focus on climate change policy that you need to have. Those things sometimes can't really coexist very well. But in addition to that, we've had other priorities, other things that have taken precedence over this. So back in 2007, 2008, we had a financial crisis throughout much of the Western world. And when you have something, a more immediate concern perhaps, like now we're facing a pandemic and all the financial problems associated with that, or if you go back 10 years to our financial crisis or the housing market, those things where people are losing their jobs and people are struggling to get by tend to take priority over a more long-term problem like climate change. And also, just people in poverty in many cases are not going to be real concerned with this type of a problem because they're more concerned, understandably, with just getting by on a daily basis, their daily survival. And then just the issue of skepticism, people not believing reports, not believing the scientists for various reasons, also tends to add into this climate of inaction. So we're just going to conclude by looking at some examples of things that non-governmental entities can do to try to address climate change. So first of all, on our list here, we have still a government, but not a national government. We're talking about a local government. The city of Seattle actually has its own climate action plan, which it adopted back in 2013. And essentially, if you boil it down, the main aim of this plan is to be carbon neutral within the city of Seattle by 2050. So that's an example of a local government taking action. Next Gen Climate, which is an example of a non-governmental organization, kind of an interest group. They are a climate action group that goes out and tries to influence and educate people, particularly millennials, millennial voters, about the critical nature of the climate change issue and encourages them to vote for people who take the problem seriously. So that's the type of thing that also is happening. We have a large corporation, multinational corporation, ExxonMobil, which of course is an oil and gas company. They are investing heavily in carbon capture and storage technology. Now, this might seem odd to you. A lot of times the oil and gas companies are cast as kind of the villains in all of this as far as climate change, and they certainly have contributed largely to the problem, but they also are beginning to understand that they can make a lot of money and prolong their existence as a company if they figure out how to live within this context of climate change and adapt to the new situation. So they're investing in ways to take carbon out of the atmosphere and to store it. They're also looking at future profitability in terms of people being able to continue to use petroleum. So if you think about that, if they develop new ways of capturing carbon from the atmosphere, that means that people can continue to use petroleum without feeling bad about it and without having the same kind of impact on the atmosphere if they know that that carbon that's being produced through their activities is able to be then taken out of the atmosphere, so they can kind of control and prolong their existence as a company in that way. Oil companies are also investing, it's not on here, but in other types of technologies. I know I've seen some commercials on TV for this, investing in alternative fuel sources like biofuels, using algae to develop fuels and things like that. And that's just another way of them kind of diversifying their business model in the event that they become unprofitable or get shut down by legislation in the future. And then finally, individual citizens. Just an example, within the city of Las Vegas, there's been this big effort to get individual people to take their sustainability more seriously. So a lot of people are switching their yards from grass to more desert landscaping. So there are actually companies that will come in, take up your entire grass lawn and replace it with stone or other kinds of materials that don't take water, for an example. And they'll do all that within the course of a day. Also, residents of colder climates, this is something that we hear about in the winter sometimes. One way that we can reduce our energy usage is by just putting down your thermostat a couple degrees, and that can have a significant impact on the amount of energy that you use within your household. So there are lots of examples of these types of things. You can probably think of other examples of things you can do as an individual, carpooling with other people to reduce your carbon footprint of travel, those types of things. So these are all actions that individuals, companies, interest groups, local and state governments can do with or without action from national governments around the world. Okay, so that's going to conclude our discussion of climate change. Thanks for tuning in.